Hello and welcome to Archive West Texas. I'm your host, Gordon Wilkerson, joined today by our producer, Rachel Boyd. On this program, we focus on history, but we also look for inspiration from our guests as we preserve and share the stories of people who shaped West Texas. This morning, we're glad to have a longtime Lubbock realtor, Jack Chapman, with us. For decades, the Chapman family name has been synonymous with real estate in Lubbock. Under the leadership of Jack's grandfather, J.W. Chapman, Jack's father, Ray Chapman, and his uncle, Harold Chapman, the family played a major role in residential and commercial real estate during a period of explosive growth in Lubbock. The Chapman family is also deeply involved in the development of Ransom Canyon, one of the South Plains' most unique communities. Today, we'll talk about the Chapman's family roots, the growth of the real estate business in post-war Lubbock, and the legacy the family leaves on the region. Jack, welcome to Archive West Texas.
Thank you, Gordon. This is a exciting opportunity. Fun to kind of revisit family history again. And also dwell a little deeper into Ransom Canyon.
Yeah, we're looking forward to it. Let's talk about your family's roots. Where did the Chapman family originally come from and what brought them to the South Plains?
My grandfather, J.W. Chapman, was born in Sulphur Springs, Texas. We came out of South Carolina as a whole. And my granddad was from a very large family, had 10 brothers and sisters. So after Sulphur Springs, he graduated and moved to Floydada, Texas. He was a teacher for 18 years in the school system, not all of it in Floydada, but a good portion of it. And from Floydada is where he migrated over into Lubbock to get into the real estate business. He originally came in and was with Chapman and Walker, which was one of the first early real estate companies. They were located at 1008 13th Street, which is where the First National Bank or the Lubbock National Bank building downtown sits currently, the parking garage. That was in that. There was a building there at that time. And they had quickly outgrew that and then moved to their new larger offices at 1011 14th Street. And that building still exists. And I still have one of the original signs with a 5-digit phone number on it, which was interesting.
So what is that building now?
I'm really not sure. I'd have to go by and take a look at it. It's had a variety of tenants and who knows what all else in it at that time.
What were your grandfather's responsibilities in education? Did you tell me he was a superintendent of schools at some point?
He became the principal.
Principal,
okay.
Yeah,
which I guess in Floydada, that was probably maybe the superintendent at the same time. Yeah. And that was encompassed in that 18-year teaching career. He actually moved to Lubbock a little bit before about 1938, and he had his real estate and insurance license. And back then, that was a big thing with a lot of real estate agencies because, you wrote off to the Texas Real Estate Commission and the Texas insurance industry, and then they sent you back your licenses. I'm sure there was a small fee involved, but I don't know what that amount was. So, Granddad, in 1941, he and L.D. Casey created J.W. Chapman and Sons.
Who was Mr. Casey?
Well, L.D. Casey was just, he was a longtime realtor in Lubbock at that time. And I think part of the Casey carpet family branched out of him. I'm not 100% sure about that, but that's kind of what I'm thinking on that. And when my father and uncle got out of World War II, they both served in the Army, that J.W. Chapman and Sons was created officially in February of 1946. And that occurred at the 1011 14th Street address. So that was the origins of J.W. Chapman and Sons.
And at that point, Mr. Casey, your grandfather, and your dad and your uncle?
Yes.
4-person shop?
And LD, I think, was ready, approaching probably retirement age at about that time that occurred. Because when Dad and them, they opened up the office on 34th Street that most people were familiar with at 3212 34th Street in 1956. They had 2 offices. They had one on 14th Street and then they had one on 34th Street in 1956.
So tell me about your dad and your uncle. Were they did they complement each other? Were they different personalities? Were they totally
different? Harold was known as the jokester and all of this, and Dad was the more serious, contemplative thinker, I guess you'd say. That Harold took the forefront, although he was the younger of the 2 brothers. Dad was at times happy to let Harold do that. Both of them were very involved in not only the state, but the local Association of Realtors and national and Texas Association of Realtors as well. Harold served on the Texas Real Estate Commission for about 12 years, helping to create the guidelines and rules that we follow today, or hopefully follow today.
So your grandfather, which was he more like, or was he? What was his role in the business?
He was a big man. He was 6'2". He was a very, very large man, and had that teacher statue. A very stoic person, and you could get a smile out of him. You know, I was one of the younger grandkids at the time, and he terrified me sometimes. But I still loved to go in and kind of listen to him talk on the phone to people. He never really did include me much in what the business dealings were or whatever. He just kind of let me observe. You know,
But you learned a little bit listening to the phone calls in that office.
Well, you do, but I had no clue or idea that I would end up in the real estate business at that time. And the office really took a big plunge in growth. I say not a plunge, it actually did a rapid elevation in size around 1959. And that's when the office, they employed 20 agents in the 34th Street office, and they had closed the downtown office at that time, and everybody went out to 34th Street, way out in the country on 34th. 50th Street in Indiana at that time was the home of the Caraway Ranch, where the big tree and the windmill sat for Winchester Square, which Dad and Harold eventually developed. But I wasn't born until 1953, so I don't remember many of the car trips we took at that time.
So how big was the Caraway Ranch? The whole section, or was
it was at least one section, extended out to where probably Loop 289 is now, close to it. But yeah, it was right out of section, about 640 acres or so. But it was a mainstay because of the mulberry tree, which stood there, and also the main ranch house or farmhouse.
And the windmill was there until United developed the market.
Well, it was actually there. Yeah. When Dad and them developed Winchester Square, they retained the mulberry tree and the windmill both. And they both remained standing until Mother Nature took a hold of everything, and mulberry tree got struck by lightning, and they did everything in the world that they could to try and save that tree, everything. I mean, they had countless number of arborists and all look at it and tech people, but they just couldn't do it. I mean, a mulberry tree, like all trees, has a lifespan. And at one time, it was the largest mulberry tree in the state of Texas, which was a pretty neat deal that Dad and them made it even more critical to keep it going in the windmill. And the windmill finally, got so rotten that they had to take it down because safety risk, exactly. And then they had another windmill built by a guy out of the family who did the original windmill. And some of the mechanical components of the original windmill were brought over to that windmill. And it was also bought out by one of the local lenders and moved across the street for a time being. When it redeveloped, Winchester Square redeveloped into, Market Street as we know it today. That's a pretty neat story on that one in its own right.
Jack, tell our listeners what Lubbock was like at that point. You mentioned the Caraway Ranch is at 50th in Indiana. Lubbock is primed for rapid residential growth and rapid commercial growth. And how did your family help make that happen?
Of course, Gordon, I was relatively young. I wasn't born until 1953. So, a lot of this happened, as I was growing up, because Winchester Square wasn't developed until I was about to go into high school at Monterey. But Lubbock just was in the right spot. It became the hub city because the 5 highways leading into Lubbock, the railroad, we were lucky to have obtained that, because without the merger of Monterey and Lubbock, we might not have gotten the railroad. That Slayton actually had the first railroad out here before we did. But yeah, Lubbock originally was developing onto the north. Before the tornado hit in 1970, my granddad and the family was involved in a lot of residential development in the area that was ravaged in the 1970 tornado and just flattened, that area. But Rushland Park was also a subdivision that the family was very active in. And then they also did an industrial development called Rushland Park Industrial, which you and I know is the little part between South Loop 289 and the Slayton Highway. There's a little industrial triangle out in there that they were very active and involved in. It's one of Lubbock's first industrial park. Of course, your family was getting started up about that same time, I believe. So we all did the industrial commercial thing. I didn't do a whole lot of, or wasn't active in the residential until much later.
You were talking earlier about some of your adventures in high school. You played in a band, had a brief career as a race car driver. Talk to us about that a little bit.
Well, I had a garage band, or it wasn't just me. It was myself and a bunch of guys that, we just got together. And my first concert first band appearance that I ever had was in Haynes Elementary.
There you go.
Which was located at 58th and
All right, so who was playing with you?
Well, starting off, Jimmy Gamble, who became an electrician and was with Texas Tech for a number of years. I think Jimmy's retired now, but he was a very good drummer and fit the deal perfectly because he had hair down to his waist. And we kept asking him, how did you make it through school? And he said, I just put it in my shirt. So, and then myself, and then Gary Hurt, who was the youngest brother of Stephen Stan Hurt, as you well know, became very active in development in Lubbock and the multifamily sector. But Gary was an unbelievable talent, musical talent here in Lubbock for a number of years. And even after our band broke up, Gary went on to have a good musical career, but he, unfortunately, diabetes caught up to him and didn't keep on.
Okay.
But we had a great time. It was a lot of fun. We played the community centers, Hodges and Maxey Community Center every weekend or every other weekend, and got to play the Reese Officers Club a few times, and then played some other things. One of our better accomplishments, we thought, was we played at the Hale Center Battle of the Bands and came in second to Liz Lawson and Al Faison and Fever Tree.
There you go.
In Plainview, Texas. So that was a lot of fun. The racing, that's always been a hobby. I just didn't pursue the aspect to take it into a professional level, but I can say it's a pretty good thrill to go 200 miles an hour and a quarter mile.
There you go.
So I've experienced, a lot of things. And of course, a lot of people say, well, you're bound to be very, very wealthy in real estate. And I tell them I had a race car. So it kind of calms that down real quick.
There you go. What was it that set your family's company apart? I mean, you guys were recognized largely as the biggest residential and commercial firm in town for a number of years.
Ray was he was an innovator. Dad came up with the ideas. Harold, would evaluate them, and then Granddad would give his stamp of approval or not. My family's office was the first real estate company in Lubbock to have matching automobiles. So that when you saw a red and white 1960 Chevrolet Impala, you knew it was a J.W. Chapman and Sons car. For the most part, they were the first ones to put two-way radios in their cars, way back before mobile phones. And the call sign was King David Charlie, KDC, something that you had to, at that time, call in to the home office and see what was going on. And, that was always fun. I remember that. Dad would let me call into the office sometimes to the operator there and catch up on the latest information. One thing a lot of people aren't aware of is that J.W. Chapman and Sons brought the MLS system as we know it today to the state of Texas and Lubbock. Lubbock was the first city in Texas to have MLS.
That's a multiple listing service.
That's the multiple listing service that we know of today, to where all the realtors pull their information together and put it into one local source. Yeah. But it was always fun. We had about an 8-foot long IBM punch card machine in our office. And whenever one of the agents needed to look for a particular house, well, they could go through, punch out their requirements. Did they need a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, 2-bedroom, 1-bath? They need a garage, different things like that. And you'd plug it in at one end of the machine and it'd go through this fluttering like a pen full of roosters. And on the other end out would come a card, 2 or 3 cards with houses that match that requirement. And they would then take that and go show property.
Yeah.
And back then you had to go check out keys from everybody. And
before some of the computer apps now. So
Absolutely.
before
Absolutely.
Zillow, before
Yeah.
Google.
Yeah. So innovation was always something that Dad, and integrity has always been a big part of the family. Honesty, sometimes too honest.
What's the
Worked with
funniest thing you ever saw happen in the office?
Oh, my Lord. There was always things going. We had a group of salespeople that whenever I went in there as a child, they all were wonderful to me. We had all experiences. We had a couple of agents in there that knew magic tricks, and they would always surprise me with a new magic trick every time. But our receptionist, Martha Knoll, was the telephone operator. And we had one of the switchboards where you'd pull up the cords, out of the base of it and plug it up into the wall in front of it. And I'd get to go sit up by Martha, and she'd let me move the cord and plug it into the hole to connect the extension. Martha was the brunt of more than one joke because she was the first one you saw. I don't know how early the whoopee cushion was invented, but Martha found it, or they found it for Martha.
Yeah.
So it was just always hard to say. And then you had, our bookkeeper, Nell Martinez. She was all, kind of back off in the back part of the office and in her little cubby hole. And typically find Harold pulling jokes on Nell on the bookkeeping part of it. But she was always a pretty straight shooter, and she'd let Harold know, ha ha, get out of here type deal. So it was just an office that had a great atmosphere to it, and one of the best realtors in Lubbock, Texas. And Brownie Brownlee was the manager of our office for a number of years before he got hired away from J.W. Chapman and Sons by the Lubbock Association of Realtors to be the executive officer there. That was a great legacy for the Lubbock Association of Realtors with Brownie's inclusion there.
Yeah, Brownie was a great guy.
Yeah.
Jack, let's talk a little bit about some of the developments our listeners might be familiar with that your family had a role in before we get into Ransom Canyon. You were talking at the break about the Lubbock Inn. You mentioned earlier Winchester Square. You talked about the industrial park. I'd forgotten just how much you guys had a role in.
Yeah, Dad and them were very active. And of course, again, growing up in the business, a lot of times as a small kid, I didn't have that much of an idea what was happening. Every weekend, Dad would load us up in the car and we'd drive around and look at Lubbock. I remember the plane crash that was sitting at 34th and Quaker being out there early on. Now, that was out there on a 2-lane dirt road. And then we'd also get to go, on certain special days, go out to the horse stables at 50th Street and Utica and ride the horses out there at Avalon Stable. And eventually that became the site of the first Frank Brown Pontiac. So Dad was very active involved in that. Dad specialized more in the commercial aspects of it, and Harold specialized in the residential aspect of it. And Granddad just kind of oversaw the whole thing. So Harold was the country club guy, and Dad was the go fishing and hunting guy.
There you go.
But, in high school, it's when we really saw a lot of growth, Winchester Square development, which I had mentioned earlier. But then Dad and them decided that Lubbock needed a really 5-star hotel at that time. And they pursued that and constructed the Lubbock Inn at the Mixed Mass intersection at 19th.
Yeah, that was
that was, oh my gosh, it was always a fun traffic light at that. But, they built the Lubbock Inn there, and it turned out to be a great success, and a lot of interesting stories out of that. That could almost take up another program in its own right. And then Ransom Canyon in 1965, they were initially approached by Walter Mischer, who was he was the major financier who came into the Ransom Canyon development out of Houston. Ransom Canyon was part of the IOA Ranch, which was one of the largest ranches in the state of Texas at the time, also known as the Johnson Ranch.
Had over 100,000 acres at one point.
It did.
It was massive.
Yeah, it's huge, absolutely huge. And then so some local guys got involved in it. Johnny Gafford, Houston Pearson, and Bill Richardson, I think, or whatever, were the three who kind of originally got going. And they started trying to put together the Ransom Canyon development. Of course,
which means you've got to take ranch land, you've got to put in water, sewer infrastructure, you've got to have some sort of physical plant, you've got to incorporate, you've got to I mean, there's more to this than just let's go out and build some houses.
Ransom was originally all spring fed. And then, throughout the history of it, they determined that some of the city farms had contaminated some of that groundwater through their application through the wastewater. And they came to an agreement at that time with the city of Lubbock to have water provided to Ransom Canyon. Ransom Canyon still has its own approved sewer facility, recently expanded it, put a new portion of that to it. So utilities at Ransom Canyon are there in full. There's a couple of places where the original springs still feed into. Ransom has a phenomenal history. It got its name because it was the exchange point for the Comancheros to bring their hostages, and then they would hold them for ransom, for goods, food, whatever, and hence the name Ransom Canyon. Part of the Brazos River, system on it, and, even to this day, it's the North Fork of the Brazos River. Still very important waterway through Texas, but the history of it, you can still find arrowheads and, all kinds of Indian artifacts if you know where to look at Ransom Canyon now. Certainly not in people's backyard unless they let you, but there are some places out there that you could still go hunt to.
So when Mr. got involved, he was basically a banker trying to figure out what to do with the upside down note. Is that right?
He was a investor, real estate developer out of the Houston area, banker. Amazing guy. Not very, you hear all these stories about wealthy, great, big, huge stature guys. No, Walter Mischer was not. He, I remember several times having supper with him at our house. Fairly small guy, slight, but very nice guy. He was always great to us.
You approached your family several times about helping him with this project.
He came after Dad or J.W. Chapman and Sons 3 different opportunities, asking them to pick up and take over the marketing and development of Ransom. And Dad and them said, look, you got a 2-lane road going out there and the access into it is just not real good. It's a struggling subdivision. But he persisted, and then he also financed the money to put in several of the roads approaching into Ransom Canyon that are there now. The front entry road, as we call it, but the back entry also had to be developed. So, Walter was a big part of it. And it was Craigmont Development is what Walter Mischer had as his pilot house for the Ransom Canyon development. Well, one thing that really hurt the original developers was in August of 65, they were working on the earthen dam to block it up, and they didn't have much reinforcement. There was a large flood that hit Ransom Canyon and really set them back financially, the original developers.
And wipe out the dam?
Almost did. And so that, Walter came in and saved the day, I guess you'd say, with his financial capabilities. But Dad and them finally did agree. 1965 is when J.W. Chapman Sons came involved. And as a matter of fact, that's when Dad, our family, moved out to Ransom Canyon. And a lot of people go, well, how did you end up going to Monterey? Well, Dad had a little 2-bedroom, 1-bath house at 4618 Detroit Avenue that he bought that we hid out whenever we had to, when we got a heads up from one of the principals that, or do y'all live there? Oh, sure we do. So, come on over. We'll have a cup of coffee. And so that's how I managed to live out at Ransom Canyon and attend Monterey High School until my graduation.
There you go.
A lot of fond memories of Ransom Canyon after we moved out.
Well, and then you're down to 4 lots left? Is that what you said?
Yeah, I got 4 parcels of land. A couple of them are like an acre and a half. And all of the lots out at Ransom Canyon can be just absolutely unbelievable as far as the views and the aspects around it. But you're going to have a builder that knows what they're doing. Most people look at it and go, well, you can't build on that. Yes, you can. Go to Colorado or find a builder who understands it. It's going to take a very skillful team of architects, engineers, surveyors, and contractors, but you can end up with a dream home that is just unbelievable.
So how did the permit for the steel house get issued?
Well, Dad and them always prided themselves in allowing unusual architecture out at Ransom Canyon, if it made sense. For example, they worked with Ernest Kiesling with Texas Tech, and they built and designed an earth shelter home out at Ransom Canyon, which exists to this day. And I think that house I think Ron Beatonbow was one of the contractors that worked with Dad and them to build that house at this time. For the first 4 years, they never connected the gas to it to create heat.
Just didn't need to.
They didn't need to.
Yeah.
That's exactly right. The house maintained a very constant temperature, and even to this day, they still have to get up and weed and mow their yard and their roof.
Yeah.
Occasionally.
Yeah.
But the steel house, back to that. Robert Bruno, Texas Tech architecture professor, approached Dad and them with this concept, this idea. And a lot of people for years saw the model. It looked like something out of a alien spaceship movie, smaller scale. Parked around Lubbock for a long time. It was over on South Loop 289, but that was Robert's inspiration for the steel house, which he started on. And you either loved it or you hated it. Our family personally thought it was miraculous. Now, it took longer than what it was intended to build, but Robert was constructing it primarily by himself with occasional help from his tech students, and then he had one other guy that helped him throughout. Finally, he got the occupancy permit on it where he could stay in a little bit, and then he got sick. Yeah. And of course, today the house has gone through a couple of different auctions and sales, and it's it's now a VRBO or Airbnb or whatever that is now. And I understand enjoying a little bit of success, but it is back on the market for sale. So I don't know.
So beyond all these buildings and subdivisions, what values do you think are most associated with the Chapman name? What's your family's legacy here in Lubbock?
I like to think that it's known that we were Lubbock advocates. And even to this day, I love Lubbock. I do. I don't like the dust storms any more than anybody else does, but I kind of look at that as a filter. And that, if you can't handle the dust storms, then Lubbock's not for you. That's just part of the deal. I always blame it on the mountains in New Mexico. It's actually not Lubbock that causes those. It's the weather system hitting them New Mexico mountains.
Yeah.
So, that's called deflection.
Yes.
But our passion for Lubbock, I enjoy seeing the different developments. I enjoy seeing the new residential subdivisions coming in. All in all, Lubbock has been guided by a lot of really smart people when you think about it. When people understand that numerically Lubbock goes east and west, and alphabetically it goes north and south on the streets and all, then people are just stunned how easy Lubbock is to get around in. There's a large presence of pride in Lubbock because Lubbock's a clean city. If you've been to some other cities, they can get pretty rank. And so Lubbock does a pretty good job of maintaining its appearance. And
on the whole, it's a great place.
Yeah,
on the whole, it's great.
It is. It is.
Jack, thank you for taking time today to share your family story with our listeners. A lot of good memories, a lot of good stories, and we may have just scratched the surface here. But
Lubbock has a lot of stories to tell, Gordon, from Pig Squeal Springs out at Ransom Canyon to sliding down the spillway where we had the fish hatcheries located out there, and even back to the Haynes Elementary story.
Well, thanks for taking time to share a few of them with our listeners. I want to thank you for listening today. Please join us again next week for another edition of Archive West Texas.